Hello, and welcome back to the Argyle Financial Controller Forum. My name is Brittany Sullivan with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our panel moderator. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, which includes complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. To ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A chat and we will address your questions at the end of the session. Now, without further delay, I would like to introduce our moderator, Veronica Obianwa, Controller at Sam's Club. We're excited to have Veronica with us and our panelists with us for a panel titled Worldwide Talent, Expanding the Search for Financial Controllers. Welcome, Veronica, and over to you.
Thank you, Brittany. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this session. My name is Veronica Obianwa. As Brittany mentioned, I am the controller at Sam's Club. Sam's Club is a segment of Walmart, Inc. I've been at Walmart over 3 years, about 3.5 years. And prior to joining Walmart, I was at PwC doing financial statement audits for almost 14 years. So just giving you a bit of background on our event. Finance is at the heart of every organization, which means that having the best finance talent is crucial to organizational success. Since hybrid work became the new normal, financial controllers and their teams are able to recruit new talent from anywhere in the world, literally anywhere. Since the new way of working is flexible, employers can look for candidates outside of specific regions and find more diverse backgrounds than ever before. This not only helps expand the finance function, but it can also increase the bottom line in the long run. So in this session, we'll discuss how remote work has forever changed the hiring landscape, the benefits of hiring candidates with diverse backgrounds, and how to find, hire, and retain the top finance talent for long-term success. I'm happy to be joined by Tom Dietrich from Eaton Aerospace, Summer Redmond from Apri Health, Andrew Belmont from Marriott International, and Megan Sheps from Cellularity. So I'll be asking each of the panelists to tell us a little bit about themselves. So name, company, and title, their background and experience. And for a bit of fun, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being poor and 10 being excellent, how would you rate your organization's success attracting talent? Why would you give them the rating you've given them? And what, if you did not give them a 10, what is stopping you from giving them a 10? So why don't we start with Tom?
Perfect. Hello, everybody. My name is Tom Dietrich. I'm a controller at Eaton Corporation in our aerospace division. I've actually been with Eaton a little bit over 14 years, so joined them right out of college. Although in that time, I did, from a background perspective, get my MBA. So kind of have a lot of experience within the company, but really just within that company. And I'd say probably with Eaton, we're probably in the 8 or 9 category. And I think, we have a lot to offer in terms of, diversity of positions, different businesses, and really, a breadth of different roles and opportunities. So I'd say that we do, a pretty good job at that.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. Summer, how about you?
Hi, I'm Summer Redmond, and like Veronica said, I'm from Apri Health. I'm the VP of Finance and Accounting there. We're a tech-enabled navigation platform and primary care model working to deliver true value-based care to the commercial market. I've been with the organization for almost 9 years now. Prior to that, I was with a few different types of organizations working with ad agencies and wetsuit manufacturers. So I've done it all. I've also worked with aerospace engineering, ironically enough. And I would probably give us similarly, probably an 8 or 9. I think we've worked really hard to ensure that we have really great benefits and that we also do a lot of really recruiting marketing. So going into markets that we're going to be opening up locations, things like that, to really set the foundation of ensuring that we have a good name out there to attract the right kind of talent.
Awesome. Thanks, Summer. Glad to have you on here. Andrew, how about you?
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew. I'm the Senior Assistant Director of Finance and Accounting at Marriott. I work out of the New York Edition Hotel, so I'm coming to you live from New York. My background, I've been at Marriott for about 6 years. I've been in hotels for about 9. I would give Marriott, on a scale of 1 to 10, definitely a 9 for our success in attracting talent. I think it's mostly driven by our reputation. I have met people who work at Marriott from like all over the world, and everybody's been with the company 10 years, 20 years, even like 30 years. People who come to Marriott, they stay. We do such a great job at retaining that I think that helps to attract people from the outside of saying like, why does nobody leave this company? We really have a lot to offer. And we also very much put a lot of emphasis on developing our talent and the people with us to help always promote from within. And we are very much into that kind of culture.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. Megan, how about you?
Hi, I'm Megan Sheps. I am the controller at Cellularity, which is a publicly traded biotech company. So I've actually only been here just under a year. I started my career at PwC as well. And after that, went to a number of different finance roles, anything from financial reporting to FP&A, more in the controllership space the last few years. I give us probably, I'd say an 8, even though you all gave yours 9. But it really has to do with the area we're in. It's a very high risk space. So it is difficult to attract people to an area like biotech that you have to have a certain risk appetite, combined with the fact that we are hybrid. So you do have to be within the area and drivable distance. So I think that limits us a little bit, but we have some really, really high caliber talent, which is why I think we're still up there pretty high. So. Excellent.
Thank you all for the introduction. And it sounds like you all, rated your organizations pretty high. So that's good. So why don't we just jump into the prepared questions, starting with Summer. Summer, how has finding, hiring, and retaining finance talent evolved over the last couple of years?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, like a lot of folks, right around the March, April 2020 timeframe, we went from being very much an in-person culture to a extremely remote culture. We, pretty early on, because we're in Seattle, we went remote about mid-March of 2020. And once we got past those initial 2 weeks where we thought we were just going to be right back in the office, we suddenly realized that we really had to change our strategy, because what we were able to do was to really expand the market that we were able to look for talent in. Seattle has a really wonderful tech-focused market, and I think it's been really kind of interesting to see how we can get different candidates by opening up to a more remote position. And so part of that also is, as accountants, we love to save money. And so when we start looking at the market-based pay that we can get, Seattle is a relatively expensive city, and so pay has tendency to be much higher here. And so if we're able to look at talent outside of that market, that really can save us some additional funds. And I think also a really big part of that is that we're able to get more diversity in our hiring pool. We don't have a lot of diversity available in the roles that we have here in the Seattle area. And so when we start looking at those areas outside of just Seattle, we really see a much broader section of the United States and the kinds of folks there that are applying for the jobs. And then the other piece really was that we were able to see, we have our finance folks that support people all across the country. And so now all of a sudden, instead of, them not being able to talk to anybody for the first 3 hours of their day, if they're on the East Coast, we're able to hire folks in the time zone. So they're able to be much more available in the time period that the folks are working. And so that's been a really big benefit for us. I think, obviously there's the challenges with the moving to remote type roles, which is really making sure that you're focusing a lot on creating the engagement opportunities that you really need to build those relationships between the folks, not just in your department, but also with other departments. And I think also, I recently had a one-on-one with one of my employees, and he specifically called out, just because there's been grumblings that we might move to a more hybrid type situation, that as a remote employee, there's a little bit of a proximity bias when you start to see folks in the office working. And so there is concern that, if the person isn't in the office when other people are, are they going to miss out on promotions or raises or acknowledgements, things like that? And so I think it's really important for us to recognize that there is that kind of built-in bias, and really kind of fight against it.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. I would say for us at Walmart and Sam's, it's been a bit of a journey going from remote. I would say we're probably more of an in-person culture with flexibility. And I think the reason that we are is for the very point that you made, that it is really difficult to find that balance between ensuring that remote workers and people that are showing up to the office every day are getting the same type of career advancement opportunities, career development and coaching opportunities. It does create a bit of a mixed bag, if you will. And so that's been a journey, and we have had some of the rumblings that you talked about too. So it's really interesting because, you know, I think from a recruiting standpoint, I don't know where that puts us in terms of how we compete with remote workers, but I will say, like, our collaboration and our culture is intact and very strong as a result of, you know, being in person and allowing flexibility. Like, you know, maybe you need to leave early, or you need to come in just for a few meetings, or, you know, miss a Friday, you know, that sort of thing. So no, that's great. Tom, Andrew, Megan, any other thoughts on the question?
I definitely have a lot of thoughts. I thought that was a great answer, first of all. But one of the things I wanted to touch on was the proximity bias, because I think that that is a great point and a possibility for all of us to have. This year, or now it's 23, so maybe like 6 months ago, I just introduced our first fully remote hire on my team specifically. And it's somebody that I know from other directors, but nobody that I've worked with directly. And it is interesting because I know she does great work, but at the same time, she's not in front of me every day like the most people are. And so I always try to make it a point to, you know, all of our meetings are hybrid meetings, and you do have to put a little bit of extra effort to make sure that you're not leaving somebody out, because that's the last thing you want to do. I know there's always concerns with remote work and, you know, how do you know if somebody's really doing what they say they're doing? But if you create the environment where people can feel included, I think that that is like one of the most important things that you can do.
No, great point, Andrew. Thanks for adding that. Tom, Megan, did you have anything to add on that question?
I just had one point. You know, I think some great ones were made already, but one that I wanted to add was around development and career progression. Seems to become or have become a much more prevalent theme recently. You know, it was always obviously something that was done, but I think it's really become a focus, and especially with the push for remote work and distributed teams, it's become much more important because it helps you to understand what each team member needs and where they are in their, you know, career and understanding of the role, and it helps you to be a better manager, you know, during those remote situations.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that point on intentionality that Andrew mentioned is so important when you're working remotely, and reaching out and keeping those lines of communication open and quite frequent to make sure that expectations are clear and met. And to your point, that career development and that coaching is still happening too. Absolutely. And I think to those who are proponents for coming in person, I think that's the argument, you know, that, oh, how do I make sure that the people that are remote are still getting those development opportunities? And I think while leaders are well-intentioned, they do struggle with that, and then struggle with that intentionality. Why don't we go around the horn, actually, starting with you, Tom? Can you share your current work model, whether you're fully remote, hybrid, fully in person, and how have you successfully managed, you know, the workforce depending on that model?
Sure, absolutely. So in my current role, I've actually had two different models. So I started out as a fully remote, and now I'm majority in office. So I've kind of made that switch. And I would say that throughout, you know, both situations, there's been definitely a lot more openness to managing work and life. So, you know, if you have appointments or things that come up, there's just a different approach that maybe wasn't there before, to, you know, to making it much easier for all employees to really manage that balance for themselves. But now that I'm majority in office, it feels a little bit pre 2020.
Yeah.
But I do have a distributed team. So I have a team that sits with me locally, and then I have a team that sits at a different facility. And so, one of the pieces that's really been a challenge is finding a tool that works to manage communication, what's too much versus not enough, make sure that everyone's engaged. And Summer had actually made a good point about, building those relationships, understanding the team members' needs and their desires is really important, because that helps you craft your communication effectively, so that everybody feels included and heard. I definitely have not only more regular touch points, but also one-on-ones with different members of my teams, just to make sure that I can facilitate that two-way communication for all the team members, even if they may be at the remote facility. So a little bit of a different twist on those things that we didn't have to do to the extent when we were all in office, but it does make it significantly better, and it helps me to make sure that I plan my communications and plan how to be inclusive of everybody. So I think that there's definitely benefit from doing remote work and distributed work successfully.
Yeah, well, that's awesome, Tom. Thanks for that. Megan, hearing from you, what are you all fully remote? Are you fully in person? Is it a hybrid?
Yeah, so we're in a hybrid, and part of it has to do with, we actually have our manufacturing and our labs on site. So we have a number of employees where, remote isn't an option, and collaboration is big, which is difficult in the remote. I came from a fully remote role, coming back into a hybrid role, so it was a bit of an adjustment. And it's definitely what I found is it's not it's actually very individual specific. You could have really high performers who just can't figure out how to manage their time when they're remote. And you could have really high performers that get distracted in the office. So it's not, I found that it just really varies by person. My team is a mixed bag. I have some people like myself who are very hybrid. I have people going every day. So we don't have anyone who's fully remote, because we really push for to have some, at least one, usually 2 days minimum kind of in the office. But having that flexibility has been really, really great.
Awesome. We did get a question in the chat that I want to pose to Summer. Summer, it sounds like you all are fully remote. And the question was, how have you addressed the risk of employees having more than one job and or ensuring your employees are not moonlighting? And I don't know if I'm old or what, but I did not realize this was a thing until actually the last couple of weeks. I've been educated on this topic quite extensively. And so when I saw it come through the chat, I'm like, oh yeah, we got to answer this question. So Summer, I'd love to hear from you and anyone else who wants to weigh in on this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of funny because we actually had that occur. We were using a temp employee. Gosh, it was, I think, almost 2 years ago now. And I was having regular meetings with her, and she said that she was doing the work. And then just one day unceremoniously quit, just no notice, just said, I'm gone, and like sent her computer back. And at that point I started going, where did the work go? And so I started looking for it, and I couldn't find it anywhere. I was able to get access to her email and things like that, and was able to realize that she was actually using our computers and email services to work for somebody else. And so I went back to, of course, the temp agency that we got her through, and said like, hey, we're not paying for this. And so it was really kind of a little bit of a debacle, and it set us back a lot because we were right in the middle of trying to do this implementation for this program, and all of the work that she supposedly had done was not there. So I think, it definitely happens. And I think one of the things that I've found is one, making sure that there's really visible work going on. So you're able to see whether you're using some kind of collaboration software, like if you're using Teams or if you're using the Google Cloud, that you can actually have access to the work that the people are working on. And two, that you are having like absolutely those regular check-ins. I was having regular check-ins, but I wasn't asking to see the work. And so that was, I think, one of the biggest challenges. So yeah, absolutely, that's an issue.
Yeah, no, thanks, Summer. Thanks for sharing. Andrew, Megan, Tom, any thoughts on moonlighting?
I, like you, did not know this was a thing. So I just learned about it on this. And I'm kind of like, how does someone pull that off? I'm trying to think, like, I can't imagine that, but I do enjoy the like SharePoints and the Teams of the world where you can actually see people doing things. So that's a good idea. But yeah, I was not aware that this was a pervasive issue. Like,
Yeah.
I have heard of this issue, and I will not pretend like I'm not paranoid about it, but our one worker who is fully remote is in charge of all of our payroll. So that is at least like a specific measurable,
yeah.
like I can see that go through every week. I can check like, okay, I got paid. I know she did it. But I think if you were having something that is less visible, that collaborating either on Teams or in, my boss and I share a OneNote, which we love, so we're not constantly pinging each other, but just something to make sure that like this stuff is really happening. But that's definitely a concern now that we've moved after COVID, but are still pretty remote and not able to see everything all at once.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Tom, were you going to say something?
Oh, I would just add that, one of the ways that I think could help, deal with this potential moonlighting is to, focus a lot more on the output rather than the inputs. It's something that I remind myself of, as I work with my distributed team is, focus more on what's that deliverable rather than, traditionally someone may have focused on, hey, how much time are you in the office or working on a particular thing? That can, at least in my case, give you specific waypoints to not only check on is the work being done, but does that person, maybe need a little bit of assistance? Is that maybe something that they need to develop a little bit more? Is the skill to, complete whatever assignment they're being given? So that's how I would deal with that. Is really to focus on what's needed from that person rather than necessarily trying to count all of their hours, because that would drive me crazy. But I think it's definitely a worrying trend, and it's something too to look at from your team. I think there's a moral element to that too, and is that something that you feel a team member might do during the hiring process? That might be something that I would look for. So definitely a new concern, but I think there's some ways to deal with it effectively.
Yeah, I agree. I think from my company's perspective, this isn't a rampant problem that we're aware of for those that we are having obviously working in person sort of helps alleviate that. I mean, I guess someone could still be doing their job, another job at their desk, but I think you'd probably walk by and kind of see that, wait, what's that? But definitely monitoring progress has got to be it, right? That output is going to be the key indicator of whether or not there's a problem, whether it's moonlighting, a performance issue, or anything else. Just the lack of output there. So no, that's a great question from someone in the audience. Andrew, I'm going to throw a two-part question at you. What competitive offerings can you offer potential candidates to attract new talent? And how has the hiring landscape evolved in regards to being able to hire talent from any remote location from your perspective?
So a lot of competitive offerings that we have, especially in travel. So, I mean, there's the standard Marriott benefits. Of course, you get discounted hotel rooms, discounted food and beverage. We operate in over 100 countries. So that makes the remote working logistics like much, much easier. I'll tell you, I plan on working remote from Honduras this December, which I'm able to do because we just operate literally everywhere. So I'm very much looking forward to that. We offer hybrid scheduling. Traditionally in my role and director roles, we're at least 3 days in the office, 2 days remote, but I do know some people get up to 3 days remote. Our payroll managers can be 100% remote. We've also introduced, or we've revamped a position. Before COVID, we had what are called bench directors, and they go to different hotels around specific regions. I have a friend who does it, so she works everywhere from like Florida to Maine. And before COVID, they would just fly you wherever you were going. And then during COVID, they said, well, you can't travel, so you have to work remote. And then we said, wait a minute, this is much cheaper if you just do this from home. So now we call it flex. And if the hotel wants to pay for you to go there in person, they will. But generally they don't. So you get to work in Florida from the comfort of your apartment in, New Jersey, or you can go, or you work remote from Maine. And it's been a lot of fun for her. I know she spent like 3 weeks working at a hotel in Maryland, and then 2 days later she was in Times Square, all from her Hoboken apartment. So I think that has been really cool. I think that also helps to attract talent, and is also like a great thing to offer, of like, you can get all this different experiences. You can see many different brands if you want to work on the hotel side, without having to actually pick up and relocate if you don't want to. We are also piloting the 4-day work week. I know that's been piloted in a lot of different markets. I can't wait for it to come to New York. I will be the first one to sign up. There's been so many studies about how productivity is actually increased by doing this. So I think that is hopefully another way of the future, in addition to all of this hybrid stuff that we're doing. And I also think that, I'm sorry, it was quite the question, so I got a lot to go through. But hiring has changed because we used to do, like, hotels were so old fashioned. You'd have one phone screen, and then you'd have to come in for 2 or 3 in-person interviews. And now you can do all of your interviews remote. We actually just extended an offer to somebody because our perfect candidate for another New York hotel was in Mexico City. And we were able to do it completely 100% remote. You have to do your due diligence when somebody's not in front of you, just to make sure that everything, checks out, check the references. But, he's moving to New York, and we couldn't be more excited. So
Wow.
I hope I covered the bases.
That was a great response to that question. I'm sitting here like, oh my gosh, I hope Marriott doesn't poach folks from Hallmark, because that is pretty great. I mean, you guys have a lot of attractive options there. So really impressive there. I want to pull a question from the chat that's coming from the audience. We are in plan to remain hybrid. Recruiting has been hindered as applicants look for full remote work. Any suggestions or thoughts on the pressure to be fully remote? I'm throwing that to anyone on the panel that wants to respond.
I would respond by saying, if it's possible, like, look at your work model. I think now is the time to really be dynamic and adapt. If you could adapt that position to be fully remote, I think it's definitely worth considering. As I mentioned, my payroll manager before, I hope she's watching and knowing that I'm blowing up her spot. But this was the first time we ever did that position remote, and it's actually working out really, really well. So I think just be creative, and if possible, I think go for it, really.
Yeah, I would just add that if you're requiring folks to come into the office for periods of time, whether it's 2 days a week or even 5 days a week, I think one of the biggest things that has really been kind of written about a lot lately is just providing things like snacks or a foosball table isn't going to get people in. You need to provide real reasons, real connections for folks to be in person. We try to have meetings where we have folks come in. So there's really a point to it, because, for me, I'm on Zoom calls most days. And so for me, it doesn't make sense to go sit in an office if I'm just going to be sitting in front of my computer like I would at home and have, a 45-minute commute each way. So I think really focusing on making sure that you're making a reason for them to come in.
That's great. Yeah. I would agree with that too. I was just going to say, from our perspective, it is something we've been struggling with, bringing people back in office for like our retained employees has probably also been challenging in and of itself, because, we've been able for years during the pandemic to work remotely. And so it's really just that importance and collaboration and to your point, Summer, if we're asking people to come in, the expectation is you all are collaborating, that you're having meetings, that they're just not sitting at their desk on Zoom calls all day. And then I think when it comes to attracting talent, I think we fully recognize that, well, one, we're asking people to move here, and two, we're located in Northwest Arkansas, and I don't know how many people have visited Northwest Arkansas or Arkansas as a state, period. I think when people think of Arkansas, if they have come, it's Little Rock, and we're 3.5 hours northwest of Little Rock. So while this is a beautiful place to live, you know, one, we need people who are, when we ask them to relocate, they're not doing the moonlighting thing and working for us for 6 months because we're giving them, you know, a couple months to relocate, and then also working somewhere else and then quitting and then going to that place. And so, you know, our focus has really been on, we'll fly you down. We want you to see Northwest Arkansas. We want you to see what it's like. We want you to walk around the home office campus, see what we're about, see why we're the, you know, the #1 largest company in the world. But, you know, I'd be lying if I said we weren't, you know, you struggling as it relates to lots of talent wanting to work remotely, and us, you know, offering that more as the exception versus the rule. So
one of the interesting things that I've noticed in a lot of articles recently is talking about how it's actually the younger generations that want to be in person more. And that's specifically because they haven't had that experience of being in an office and building those relationships. Whereas, you know, us older folks, we've had that, and we're perfectly content with just working from home. You know, I like being able to walk to the bus stop at 4 to meet my daughter as she gets off the bus. So I think that that's kind of an interesting thing to note as you consider your hiring strategies.
yeah, no, I agree. When I think about coming out of college, I wanted to get out and meet people, and I didn't know how to do my job. I needed somebody to tell me what was going on. I needed to listen in on those conversations that were happening around me and pretend like I understood, you know. I needed all of that. And so sitting in my, you know, my home office alone, and like, you know, right after college, that would have been tough for me. So I can definitely empathize with that.
I was just going to add to that. I've heard a lot about some of the younger workers having a hard time getting proper training, which you guys both just touched upon, and mentorship, and not being able to get that remote. So I could see some of them saying, look, I'm young, I need to learn. I want to learn from someone, and I'm not going to be able to do that remote. So it is a selling point. It's interesting to hear how many of them are self-aware about that, though, to some extent, which is great. Because I don't know if a lot of them appreciate that. They probably don't appreciate it until a few years later. They're kind of like, what did I learn the last few years?
Yeah.
So it's something to kind of make them aware of as you're recruiting them. Like, look, this is what we can offer you. You know, it's not just a job. We're really gonna, you know, move you forward. This is what we're gonna teach you. These are the trainings. We're gonna have you meet multiple people. Because I think that is something that they may not even appreciate up front, but it's really going to serve everyone in the long run.
Yeah. Well, Megan, since we're on you, our prepare questions, the one I wanted to ask you was, you know, how does hiring diverse candidates, you know, help improve an organization's overall culture and bottom line in the long run?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, you know, diversity has been such a topic, obviously, the last few years. And I think there's probably countless studies that quote the benefits of it. But I think in my experience, you know, especially in finance, I think we're in this, what I'll refer to as an evolution, where we want to do less and analyze more, and always looking for new ideas to do that. Diversity, without a question, just brings new ideas to the table. It allows new approaches, viewpoints, process improvement, getting kind of thinking outside the box to solve problems so that we can do, like I said, analyze more and do less, which is our ultimate goal. I think, yeah, if you didn't allow all those new ideas to come in, you have no idea what we're capable of and how much more we could do. Especially in the international realm, I found a lot of success in just different cultures and how they approach problems differently, how they can mention something in 3 words that you haven't thought of in 10 years. And it's amazing just how those viewpoints can come together very, very quickly. And I think, you know, diversity encompasses a number of areas, but that's one thing I've seen in particular. Also, it's known to really help employee morale. I know me personally, I like being myself at work. I don't like having to, you know, filter or act a certain way or answer a question a certain way. I want to come to the table and say, these are my ideas. And diversity really encourages that. It really allows people to say, okay, you know what, I can really be myself here. I'm comfortable here. I want to stay here. And I think that's a really important thing that I think it just shouldn't be taken for granted at all. I also think, using it to retain employees obviously is a cost savings. Everyone knows that it's harder to recruit. So I think there's very simple things you can do to make people feel valued in the diversity realm that will ultimately just, like I said, save the company money in the long run. But I think it's always a very difficult thing to quantify when you're putting in a diversity program. It's very difficult to measure. You can measure turnover, you can measure, certain realms of diversity, gender, there's certain things you could quote. But I think when you really just start to see if people enjoy waking up every day and coming to the office, even if it's remote, you're going to know that you're doing something right. I also think it's a great way to attract new talent. I think when new talent is coming in and they're interviewing, and I always encourage people when they interview to interview with a lot of different people in the organization, not just within the department. I think if they see diversity when they're interviewing, they're going to know that they're going to experience that when they're there. So I think it's got to not just be a check the box, hey, we want a D&I initiative, that's great. I think everyone has to feel it. And I think it has to come across from everyone in the organization. I know I've said a lot really quickly there, but I think those are the key points. Like I said, it's I think it just goes without saying. I think employees are happier. I think they also start to have better interactions with what I refer to as both internal and external customers. So I think when employees are feeling that, they're feeling valued, they're feeling part of the team, I think it just comes across with everyone they deal with when they're representing the company. So I'll stop there, but.
No, that was an awesome answer. I couldn't have said it better. I don't know if others want to add.
Yeah, I mean, I think, there was this, I talked about earlier, we're accountants, we like numbers a lot. And so I think that, to Megan's point, there's a lot of studies out there that have shown really the benefit in a very measurable way around having diversity in an organization. Organizations that are diverse have 2.5 times higher cash flow per employee. They have 19% higher revenue. They're 70% more likely to report that they captured a new market. I mean, there's just numbers galore that show how important it is. One that I saw, a statistic that I saw yesterday, though, that I thought was really disheartening was, with all of the rounds of cuts that we're seeing in a lot of organizations right now, 3.1% of the cuts were specifically around DEI leadership, whereas it was 2.2% elsewhere. And so really there's, I think it's a shame that we're showing that like some of these DEI initiatives are a little bit more performative than they are like really substantial. And that's sad because obviously it's a really great benefit to an organization. And so I think it's really important that we don't allow it to become just strictly performative.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't know, when I think about myself, when I've interviewed with companies, Megan, to your point, if I'm interviewing and everyone looks the same, I'm like, no, this is the place for me because I don't look like everybody else. And I don't know that I need to look like everybody else. I just need to know that everybody can belong. I need you to send me signals that everybody can have a fair shake in that organization. And there's different ways to send that signal. And Summer, to your point, when you cut your DEI workforce, you're sending a signal. It might have been unintentional, but you sent it and we got it. So all of that's important. And I think, as a leader of inclusive teams, I my pride and joy is really seeing those teams perform. And perform better than other teams, honestly, and I don't think I don't really think it has as much to do with me as leader as much as it has to do with me being intentional about inclusivity, wanting to have diversity of thought on my teams, which naturally comes from having diversity in backgrounds and race and gender and the like. It just comes naturally. You really don't have to try for diversity of thought if everybody is different, and it feels uncomfortable at first. It feels really uncomfortable, but that discomfort really drives innovation. It drives continuous improvement. It drives excellence. So yeah, I'm all about diversity. I could talk about that topic forever. So we got in some really great questions in the chat, and I'm just going to kind of do a firing round because we only have about 11 more minutes here, but I think some of these are really good. So I'm going to go a little bit back to the hybrid work, because I know a couple of us mentioned that we're doing that. In what ways are companies monitoring compliance with hybrid work policies? I know at one point Walmart, we were, wanting people to come in the majority of the time. That was kind of the initial mantra when we were coming back from COVID. Just curious how you guys, if there's something similar to that, and how are they tracking that at your companies?
I know from my perspective, at least, locally at the site here within Eaton, it's really as a, how do you need to be on site to do your job? So, we don't, for instance, have a checklist of, hey, you have to check on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday that you're here. It's really more around, are you getting, your work done? Are you collaborating when you need to in person? And, if you're meeting those goals, then there's not really an oversight, unless maybe you're missing meetings or people feel as though, you're not including them in decisions and things to that nature. So it kind of goes back to the point that we made in that section, which is there's got to be a reason to do the in-office. And as long as that reason is fulfilling, at least in my organization, that's typically how we're working it.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. Anyone else?
Just to piggyback on what Tom said, we're also mostly focused on deliverables, even though there is like the rules of like, 3 days in person, 2 days remote. I could go in 5 days if I took 5 days remote. As long as I did it, that's all that my immediate supervisor is really concerned with. If I reconciled my balance sheet in Aruba or New York, she's like, as long as they're right, we're good. And I think that that's a pretty good attitude to have about it. You do need to be in person sometimes for that face-to-face collaboration, but if you're meeting your deliverables, that's pretty much all, at least Marriott is concerned with. If the job gets done, just get it done.
So I have a question. Go ahead.
I want to balance my balance sheet from Aruba. So
you jumped in.
I
wanted to build off the Aruba comment as well. I actually had a question though, building off the Aruba comment, Andrew. Does your organization have any concerns about tax consequences of people working in different locations? I'm just curious about that aspect too.
Because we already operate in those locations, as long as there is some entity there in some way, they're totally fine. I mean, we're in over 100 countries, so you have to kind of try to find somewhere where we're not. And I think that's one of the benefits of working for a large organization, because I have a friend who he loves to work remote, but his company is based in LA and only operates in the US. And so when he goes and he works remote from Mexico City, because of the tax consequences, they tell him you can work remote for 5 months and 3 weeks, but then you have to come back to the US.
We had that issue as well.
Yeah. I figured there was something to it. I forgot that Marriott pretty much is everywhere. There's a Marriott everywhere. So that is another perk, I guess. That's awesome. Going back to the trend of diversity and distributed teams, any advice on managing teams as companies and teams start to move offshore, for cost optimization, cost savings? Anybody have any perspectives on that?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked in environments where we had offshore shared service centers. So I work for a small company now, so we're kind of all nearby. But in my past experience, a lot of it had to do with actually just trying to solicit information from them, understanding what works for them. Because I think, I don't know if it's just here in the States, but I think we're used to people coming to the table and like demanding and saying, I want this. And what I found sometimes is people aren't necessarily going to come out right and say what they want and what they need. So it's kind of building that rapport over time and understanding what works, what doesn't work. We did a lot more kind of conference rooms with video capabilities, so that you kind of felt like you were in the same room the best that you possibly can while virtual. So it was less this type of Zoom Teams environment. It was more us trying to all get in the room together in person and have them getting in the room together in person on the same days, so that there was as much collaboration as you could get. I think that's a big part of it. But I think, like I said, I think it's really asking them, like, what do they need? How do they want to feel like they're part of the team? Or how how is something we're doing different than what they're used to culturally? Are we doing something that doesn't make sense for them? You know, and really trying to get that out of them. And I find sometimes you just have to build that trust and then they'll open up, but it takes a little bit of time. I don't think it's something that's quick. I think you really have to build that rapport with them.
Great answer.
Yeah, I think I'd add that, you know, even in different cultures and in different places around the world, you know, there may be guides that, you know, a particular culture may respond in a certain way to different situations, but you're still ultimately, you know, dealing with individuals. And so my advice would be to get to know those individuals, what their needs are, you know, how they react in different situations, and use that. You know, although, you know, sometimes those overall guides can help you a little bit in those initial conversations. It's getting to know those diverse individuals that I think really adds the value.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I'm going to take two questions and mush them together because I think they're sort of related or get to the same point. But coming back onshore, or just even thinking about, you know, local teams that are both remote, some are remote and some are in person, how do you make sure that the remote workers are feeling included with the team? And how do you, you know, if you do, check on the mental health of your remote employees?
I think that kind of goes back to the intentionality that we had touched on before, of always making sure that you are reaching out, you know, whether it's instant messages, but having like touch-base calls. We do all of our meetings as hybrid meetings. So whether you're in person, remote, hybrid, if you don't feel like walking up 2 flights of stairs, like everybody can be included in that way. I think the mental health of remote workers is a really good and important question that I would actually like a little more time to think about. But as long as you are working to make sure that those people that are not in front of you know that you are open and available and you keep the lines of communication open, I think that's a great place to at least start.
Yeah, I think, you know, to the hybrid meeting piece, you know, we're very fortunate in that all of our meeting rooms are set up to do both virtual and in person. But I think, you know, it can sometimes be a challenge. You know, we all get zoomed out to a certain extent and we don't always want to be on camera, but also that being on camera helps to build that connection. And so I think that there's a balance to be had there. When it comes to the mental health piece, you know, I have one-on-ones every week with my employees. I have skip levels at least once a month. And all of those, you know, I really make a very concerted effort to not just talk about like, hey, what's going on in the work world, but also like what's going on in your personal life. So, you know, I have employees who have relatives in Ukraine, and, you know, meeting with them and talking with them and really understanding the challenges that they're having in their lives, I think is really important.
I was just going to add, one of the things I had done at one point was to ask anonymous questions such as, what did you want to be when you grow up? What are your hobbies? And then we all basically got on a Zoom call and presented them without anyone actually having to fess up to their answers, but just trying to insert the personal when you can without making it feel forced, which is very difficult to do. But I found that that was actually received really, really well when I did that in one of my previous roles.
Awesome. Awesome. Those are all great responses. We've got 2 minutes left. Any final thoughts on the competition or street fight for talent? Any final thoughts? Any final words of wisdom?
I mean, I think one of the things that we've done is really build some really good relationships with recruiters as well, external recruiters, just because at times, you know, the accounting finance recruitment can be very, you know, specific and narrow to a given set of people. And so sometimes the regular recruiters for the organization aren't necessarily, they don't have that pipeline built up. And so really making those relationships so that they understand who you are as an organization and who you are as a manager. So that way they're really providing candidates that are going to be better suited.
Awesome.
I think maybe my takeaway is maybe a statement of be intentional. be intentional about how the job is structured, so remote, hybrid, be intentional about the development opportunities, be intentional about what it's really providing the applicant, and be sure to voice that throughout the process. And I think that would lead to some success.
Tom, I feel like that's a great ending to this session. I'm just going to close it out there. That was fantastic. Be intentional is the final message. Thank you all for listening in the audience. And Brittany, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you guys so much for such an insightful panel discussion. I also want to thank everyone who joined us for this fantastic session. This session, along with all of today's content, will be made available on demand following the event. This does officially conclude the Argyle Financial Controller Forum. Thank you again for joining us and engaging in our content. Thank you all so much again. Have a wonderful day.